Welcome to RHI's Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today we are with Lester Jones, Chief Economist with the National Beer Wholesalers Association. Hey, Lester, great to see you, and thank you for taking the time today to participate in this interview series. I want to begin with just a brief background. How did you get to become a chief economist for the Beer Wholesalers Association? What was your path to this career?
Okay, well, thank you for having me. This is coming up on 20 years, if not a little bit more, of kind of being focused in on alcohol beverages. Started out as an economist working for Nielsen Arbitron, which is the radio ratings, TV ratings company for most media, and found a job with a place called the Beer Institute. And the Beer Institute was the trade association that represented the major brewers in Washington, D.C., and advocated on their behalf in front of Congress and regulatory agencies and such. So spent a lot of time looking at the beer industry on the supplier side. After a little bit of time with them, I moved over to the National Beer Wholesalers Association. And this is the organization, DC-based, federal trade-based organization that represents the interests of beer wholesalers in Washington, D.C., and to a certain extent around the country as well, also in certain state houses. And we work let me say it this way, we work very closely with our members and their state associations to help promote and advocate on behalf of beer distributors in the state houses. So both a federal component and a state and local component as well. So I'm coming up on 20 years of pretty solid beer experience having done this. And it's always kind of focused on what's going on in the industry. What do volumes look like? What do the consumers look like? What does retail look like? What's the entire supply chain of this industry, and how does it work together cooperatively and effectively and efficiently to get beer into consumers' hands, whether it's at a grocery store or at a bar, a tavern, a nighttime event, wherever it goes, it goes. And that's one of the beautiful things about beer, is that it is everywhere. And it seems to have done a great job at becoming part of our culture.
Well, that's interesting that you had that early background with Nielsen, and 20 years ago, people's form of entertainment was really quite different. I'd imagine Nielsen ratings were pretty much, did you watch ABC, NBC, or CBS, But today, we don't really know how people are accessing their entertainment. And I guess the same can be said in terms of how people are accessing their beer or whatever other alcohol beverage they consume. So how have you seen the consumption patterns and where people access their beverages and how they consume them change prior to the pandemic? But more importantly, how have you seen those patterns evolve even differently?
Yeah. So the talking point that I'm using a lot these days is the acceleration of change. We knew with as millennials were approaching that 21 plus age cohort, when they were coming out of college and they were starting to get jobs early in 2000, they were just kind of maturing. We knew change was coming. And we also knew on the older demographic side, on the baby boomer side, we also knew that baby boomers were maturing into retirement age. So we had these two big demographic bubbles that were already in a transitionary period pre-COVID. And what COVID did was accelerate that. The work at home idea was always there. People love that idea of being a little bit more technologically free, freed by technology, with a little bit more opportunity for mobility. COVID accelerated that. We already knew that people were kind of leaving some of the northeastern states, Chicago, New York, New England, and Northern California. We already knew that there was some migration out of these geographies already. COVID accelerated that. We knew that there was different patterns of drinking and consumption, and where people were drinking and what they were drinking. COVID accelerated that. All that we see is this acceleration of change in the marketplace. Like you said, one of the interesting things about way back when in the early 2000s, when the internet and internet radio and Napster was coming on, and we already saw that in how people were consuming their entertainment, their TV and their radio. And we were desperately at Arbitrage Nielsen, we were desperately trying to figure out ways to capture. How do we capture that? Because before we just sent out what we called a paper diary. Made a phone call, sent a paper diary with a $5 bill in it. People wrote down everything they did and they sent it back. But all of a sudden, in that period of time, people just stopped responding to phone calls. They all had cell phones, right? And people stopped responding to mail surveys. They were on the internet. So, in early 2000, we were in late 1980, in the 1990s and early 2000s. Our economy was already trying to adjust to what we're trying to adjust to today. We were already doing that 20 years ago. It's not like this is a shock to anyone. The switch to online from let's say virtual reality to in real life was already happening in an extraordinary pace in our economy. COVID accelerated that.
That's interesting. Now, from a distributor point of view, a wholesaler point of view, I remember when I first started in this world and this industry, distributors were basically your Budweiser distributor, your Miller distributor, maybe Coors would tag on when they started to enter the marketplace. But the craft brewery industry totally changed the dynamics of the distributor industry, I would imagine, and a lot of state laws and regulations, that whole three-tier system, and that if you're a producer, you can't be a distributor and you can't be a retailer. All of that has been also kind of accelerated, I would think, prior to COVID. And then now, even after COVID, a lot of the ways in which distributors have to interact with their retailers and the consumption patterns of people and what people expect. I don't want to just have 3 taps on my bar. I want to have 90 taps on my bar. And somehow or another, I got to get all of those kegs into my basement. And how has the role of the distributor changed in terms of meeting these market forces for the consumer, particularly in the on-premise sector?
Yeah, well, a great question. Once again, let's talk pre-COVID. This was already unraveling in front of us. We had seen a proliferation of small independent suppliers, brewers appear in the marketplace, and they were working in very micro marketplaces. They were literally working street corners and neighborhoods, right? They were like, this is where you come if you live in this urban area. This is where you come for your beer in the afternoon, and this is where you can take it home with you, and you can really slide. I used to call it colonial beer because I thought it was more like colonial days when you pushed your wagon wheel down the cart and you went, and,
Well, it's almost like the Tide House, the way the Tide House was in the UK and in Australia.
Yeah.
You went to one place and you only got one beer.
Yeah, but the reality is that they were still small and independent, and they had not, the small brewers had not merged into these conglomerates of what had happened, in during the Prohibition time. Once upon a time in America, we had lots of small little neighborhood breweries, and they all serviced their local communities. And over time, they all kind of merged into regional brewers and into the national brewers. And that's kind of the evolution of the beer industry in the United States. And what we had seen in the craft beer movement is that the notion of an independent, a small local neighborhood independent supplier was resonating very well with millennial consumers, and I wouldn't even say millennials, with the entire spectrum of consumers. Because 60-year-old people, if you went into a local tap room, you were just as likely to see some 60+ consumers as you were some 20+ consumers, just because that model had resonated so well across the demographic spectrum. So the idea that craft brewing had already started to change the alcohol beverage marketplace pre-COVID. When COVID hit and everything kind of just came to a screeching halt, there was an immediate and necessary policy change that had to come about for these businesses to survive. And that's how we got beer to go, cocktails to go, expanded outdoor seating. We a little bit of almost every main street became a bourbon street this summer. Right? I mean, if you walked into any kind of downtown area over the summer in America, there was it was Bourbon Street. People were outside because they couldn't be inside. They were outside on the street corners drinking. Well, that's Bourbon Street, for crying out loud. So we created a Main Street, Bourbon Street culture very quickly, snap of the fingers. My business needs to survive. I need to be outside where the air is fresh and clean and the breeze is blowing, and that's what we did. And the ability for the economy to, and the marketplace and regulators to respond so quickly, I think is a story that hasn't been, celebrated enough. And beer distributors and suppliers and beer distributors and retailers all work to make that happen. So, a little bit of, the cats are out of the bag. I don't think we can collect them all back up and put them back in the way they were. So now the question is, how do we move forward? And a lot of people keep talking about how to get back to what we had, when in fact is never going to happen again. You're never going to have the economic circumstances, the demographic circumstances, the business circumstances, the public health circumstances that created what we have today. So time for us to move forward and not look back. Can't look back.
We have a kind of an infographic that we talk about. You have the patron, the venue, and the district, and they're all shaped by not only the market forces, but also governance. And governance is not just, the state and county and local government passing rules and regulations and policies and working to enforce them. Governance also includes how associations form and how they advocate for their own best practices and develop guidelines. We saw this happening, for instance, with the National Restaurant Association, putting out guidelines for how to open up safely and how to protect your employees and your customers. And, New York City, the New York City Hospitality Alliance has been very active, not only as an advocate for policy changes to support their members and to get them the funding that they need to survive, but also, helping the health departments and the other government entities come up with more practical guidelines for how businesses can open and operate safely. So you have these two kind of force fields. The marketplace, like you're saying, is dramatically changing, and the consumer demands are changing. And it seems what you're saying is you're going to have more of a localized economy, at least for the short term, because tourism and travel and conventions and all of those other things are going to be years before they kind of come back to the way they were. So there'll be more of a localized economy. So over the next 18 months, with this whole idea of self-governance and working with regulators to kind of preserve the new norms, what role do distributors have in this whole mix of things? Where do they fit? Where do your members fit? And how are they going to adapt to this more localized economy?
Well, first of all, our beer distributors are already localized. Beer distributors have territories with their suppliers. So if you're a Budweiser distributor, Budweiser says, please sell my beer in this territory, and Miller Coors does it. And any other brewer works with a beer distributor to define a territory and to maximize sales in it. That's the job of the beer distributor. So, and most people don't realize that a brewer makes beer and there's a financial transaction where they sell it to a distributor. So the distributor gives the brewer money and he gets beer. So suddenly the brewer has all the cash to go buy more supplies to make more beer. And now the distributor is sitting on a pile of beer that is not cash. He can't pay his employees with it. He can't buy bills with it. He can't buy gas with it. He's got to turn it back into cash. So his job is to go and sell that beer into that local retailer community. So whether it's on premise or off premise, it's bars and nightclubs or taverns or stadiums. So that beer distributor, he's a local economic development genius, because beer needs to be turned into cash so we can take it back and give it back to the brewer. So within the three-tier system, there's a financial exchange of money that needs to keep flowing. So for me and for our members, we are already there to promote and to develop local markets and to find new channels of distribution into retail and ferret out and find those new things that COVID is creating. It's we're very, pre-COVID, we're very used to looking at who's got a license and how's that license being used and how much is that licensee buying? Well, COVID created so much unlicensed alcohol consumption because everyone was at home. We have no idea how many big neighborhood parties were going on and how much driveway drinking was going on. And that's where all that extra consumption was coming in that was actually in unlicensed establishments. So part of what I think beer distributors need to do is start working back with their on-premise retailers or bars or restaurants and start kind of getting that hidden backyard, driveway consumption that we had last year. Almost that Bourbon Street, every main street was a Bourbon Street, and in so many cases, people were just kind of going from one licensee to another licensee carrying beer, and I'm going to have a drink here outside, and then I'm going to walk down the street with my beer and have another, have some appetizers down here. That was it created a very fragmented marketplace. So I think the number one thing that beer distributors need to do is kind of help these markets heal. Let's get the venues, let's get the bars and the taverns back doing what they were really good at doing, is providing a licensed establishment where people could come and consume and drink beer, and things were kept, within the boundaries of what alcohol regulators really wanted to do. So that's what we got to do.
Kind of a liaison, and like you said, because they have access at the state level as well as the local level to government authorities, they could begin to help negotiate and say, yes, we don't want our products to be consumed irresponsibly in unlicensed venues, but we need to work with government to try to help make it so that that product gets consumed more in a controlled environment. So that's that liaison role. Yeah. So that's exciting evolution and development. And clearly a lot of the puzzles are moving around pretty quickly. You don't really know what the picture is going to look like when it all comes together. So, well, this has been great, Lester. I like your accelerated change concept. I think it's an interesting way of looking at things, and at the same time, I always think of a quote that which grows quickly withers and dies, but that which grows slowly endures. And I think in a way, the systems, the way we had them before, took a long time to mature and grow. And I think those are the ones that we'll eventually return to. So I think there's an opportunity to preserve what was good, but also to capitalize on these trends like you're talking about, to make it even better, and to realize that perhaps there was some restrictions that were unnecessary, and the floodgates opened and showed that really the sky didn't fall.
Yeah, I mean, the sky did not fall. I agree. And the accelerated change is always going to create more opportunity. And I don't think it's closing doors. I think it's opening doors. And those in business who are open-minded and thinking outside the box and looking for opportunity are gonna find it. And it's, we can't be looking back. Can't be looking back and wishing we could get things. We put the
the beer back in the bottle, right?
Can't put the genie back in the bottle, guys. The genie's out, he's gone. Let's push this puppy forward, and let's look for the opportunities that, especially for RHI members and for people that are looking to RHI for guidance, let's open our eyes and look forward, and not try to put the genie back in the bottle. So yeah, we got a lot of work to do, but it's going to be interesting work, and it'll have lots of opportunity for all of us.
Well, thank you, Lester. This has been quite informative. You really have a great way of taking complex topics and making them more accessible to people. So I appreciate
my pleasure. Yep. Well, my pleasure working with you guys. Thank you.
Okay.